Bukowski's grave says, "Don't try." Sounds crazy, right? The guy worked for years at the post office, wrote thousands of poems, pushed through rejections, and suddenly, don't try? But in these two words lies a philosophy that will flip your understanding of life. Most people kill themselves chasing things they don't need, pretending to be someone they're not. Bukowski found a different path, the path of raw honesty. He lived a life that others are afraid to even dream about. Alcohol, women, failures, pain, all without filters. And you know what? That's exactly what made him free. Now you're going to learn the truth they've been hiding from you your whole life. Get comfortable and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We're starting a journey. Part 1. The Concept of Effortless Action. On Charles Bukowski's gravestone, you'll find the words, "Don't try," which have both confused and inspired people for years. At first glance, it seems like these words contradict everything we know about him. I mean, Bukowski dedicated years to honing his craft, handling a grueling job at the post office while pumping out thousands of poems and stories. He hustled, probably harder than most, to make it as a writer. So, what's the deal with "don't try"? Well, it taps into a deeper meaning, something central to Bukowski's beliefs about living life authentically. In his personal letters and writings, Bukowski broke down trying into two distinct types. One kind is familiar to everyone. It's forced, frantic, and just plain exhausting. You end up chasing things you don't genuinely want or pretending to be someone you're not. Like swimming against the current. It's exhausting and ultimately gets you nowhere. But there's another kind of effort, one Bukowski discovered over time. It's when you're drawn to something so naturally that pursuing it is like breathing. When Bukowski worked at his typewriter, it wasn't about impressing anyone or living up to some grand standard. He was simply letting whatever was inside him come out. The words flowed from somewhere deeper within. If you have to force yourself to care about something, Bukowski thought, then maybe it's not truly important to you. This contrast between forced exertion and natural flow became a cornerstone of Bukowski's outlook on life. He observed how people chasing after status, money, or external validation often end up stressed, unhappy, and not as successful as they hoped. That desperation shows and, ironically, drives away what they want. On the flip side, when people pursue what genuinely interests them and tap into their talents without clinging to outcomes, they tend to achieve more than they imagined. The key is letting go of desperation, pursuing something for its own joy and passion, not for rewards it might bring. Bukowski didn't come to these insights all at once. Throughout his 20s and 30s, he faced countless rejections for his stories. Someone else might have changed their style to please editors, but not Bukowski. He kept writing what felt true to him, even if it seemed risky or offensive. He believed that if it was genuine enough, it would eventually find its audience. And he was right. What initially made his work hard to publish is exactly what keeps it alive today. His mindset extends beyond just writing. It touches every aspect of life. Bukowski saw how people waste time trying to care about unfulfilling jobs, maintaining relationships that have run their course, or chasing goals society tells them to want. They ignore what truly enriches their lives because it's impractical or frowned upon. This creates a silently difficult existence, where you're constantly battling to care about things that don't matter while ignoring those that actually do. The genius of don't try is that it helps you distinguish real desires from superficial ones. If you have to constantly push yourself to pursue something, if staying motivated feels like a chore, you're probably chasing the wrong thing. But if the thought of not doing something hurts more than the struggle to pursue it, if giving up feels like losing part of yourself, then you found something worth your time. This natural calling is at the heart of what Bukowski believed authentic living is about. It requires a lot of courage because it often means not meeting others' expectations of your life. Bukowski also knew that don't try applies to how we present ourselves to the world. Many strive hard to be liked, say the right things, and put up a facade of success and happiness. They craft these images for approval and to avoid criticism. But this is exhausting and ultimately leads nowhere meaningful. Living in a world where you're always second-guessing how people see you and changing how you act to please them can be draining. But Charles Bukowski, he was the complete opposite. He showed up as his true self, warts and all, not wasting time trying to explain or say sorry for being who he was. This authenticity drew people in like bees to honey. They loved his work because it felt real in a sea of fake. Bukowski's "don't try" mantra tapped into something deeper, almost soulful, that he found through writing. As he went further in his career, he realized that his best stuff came out when he quit overthinking. He wasn't sweating over clever lines or profound ideas. He just laid it out as it was, blunt and straightforward. The magic wasn't about trying to be profound. It was about being genuine. He figured out that creativity flows best when you let it lead the way, rather than forcing it. But this isn't just about unleashing creativity. It's a life lesson, too. Life gets a whole lot better when you stop trying to make things happen and just roll with what naturally comes, reacting sincerely. Don't try is also about recognizing the difference between real self-assurance and just putting on a show. A lot of folks saw Bukowski as this gruff, rebellious character who couldn't care less about what people thought. But if you really understood him, you'd see that his tough demeanor wasn't meant to intimidate anyone. It was because he didn't need anyone's approval. He was comfortable with himself, imperfections included, which freed him from needing validation from others. This kind of confidence is unshakable because it doesn't hinge on others' opinions. It's about knowing who you are and being okay with it, even if others don't see it the same way. This way of thinking also changes how you handle failure and setbacks. Most people run from failure, or when it hits, they pretend it doesn't hurt. Bukowski had a different approach. He accepted his failures, learned from them without letting them make him bitter. When his early stories got rejected, he didn't pretend it didn't sting. He felt the disappointment, used it as fuel for his next project, and kept moving forward. His straightforward approach to failure made him tougher and more resilient than those who hide from their setbacks. Ultimately, don't try is about trusting yourself enough to follow your gut instead of forcing yourself into roles that don't suit you. It's about having the courage to let people down, if it means staying true to yourself. It's understanding that the most meaningful actions don't always come from dogged persistence, but from being in tune with who you really are. When you stop trying to be what you're not, you start to embrace your true self. And that real you, with all your flaws and uniqueness, is way more valuable than any perfect image you're chasing. This is perhaps the boldest part of Bukowski's message. In a world constantly pushing us to improve, optimize, and achieve more, he presents a daring idea. Maybe the secret to a satisfying life is to relax a bit and trust how things naturally unfold. Part 2. Seeing Suffering as the Ultimate Teacher. Most schools of thought out there try to steer people away from pain, or at least soften its blow. But Bukowski? He was singing a different tune altogether. He viewed suffering not only as something unavoidable, but also as an essential piece of understanding what it truly means to be human. This wasn't about having some twisted affection for misery or battling a dark cloud of depression. Nope, this was wisdom born from the trenches. Wisdom he picked up after trudging through years of hardship and emerging on the other side with truths that a cushy life just doesn't teach you. When you look at his early years, you'll see a dad who didn't hold back from beating him cruelly, stripping him down and lashing him with a razor strap until his skin was raw and bleeding. His teenage years weren't a bed of roses either, with severe acne marking his face with permanent reminders and making him a target of jokes and rejection. These early chapters taught him a straightforward lesson. Pain isn't a rare anomaly. It's stitched into the fabric of life. Instead of trying to bury or escape from these memories, he used them as a lens to view the world's true nature, stripping away the shiny veneer most folks try to maintain. Bukowski's suffering led him to discover that pain has this unique ability to dismantle all the little myths and pretenses people cling to in order to shield themselves from the cold, stark truth. When real pain, physical or emotional, takes the stage, all those polite fibs that keep the social wheels spinning fall to pieces. You end up seeing yourself and others without the masks and roles that usually keep reality hidden. This raw honesty that life thrust upon him framed how he viewed the world. He came to favor this unvarnished truth over the comforting illusions that come from ducking the hard facts of life. He got to the point where he realized different types of pain deliver different lessons. The sting of physical pain reminds you of your body's limits and frailty. Emotional wounds go deep, shining a light on just how much people crave connection and showing how love, betrayal, or loss can leave their mark. Struggling to make ends meet opens your eyes to power dynamics, class division, and society's way of sorting people into winners and losers. Bukowski lived through these sufferings and more, each adding to his understanding of what it means to be human. To him, people who'd been shielded from life's rough patches seemed a bit like children who still believed in fairy tales. Somewhat naive. But he didn't see suffering as just a matter of toughing it out. He believed that your response to suffering decides whether it breaks you or builds you up, wiser and stronger. The key isn't dodging pain or getting lost in it, but staring it down and extracting the insights it offers. That takes a bravery many shy away from, since they're so focused on avoiding anything that makes them uncomfortable. Bukowski, though, leaned into the pain, picking it apart to find the truths hidden within. Following this path showed him that suffering reveals layers of yourself that comfort keeps safely tucked away. When life is smooth and easygoing, it's simple to maintain a rosy self-image, thinking you've got it all together. But when chaos strikes, when you're broken-hearted broke, or at rock bottom, that's when your true self shows up. You come face to face with your selfish tendencies, uncover hidden fears, and see just how far your values will stretch when put under pressure. These truths hurt, sure, but they're invaluable because they show you who you really are, not just who you wish to be. Bukowski also noticed that those who hadn't really experienced life's harsh lessons generally lacked empathy and depth. They may sport all the traditional signs of success, but often come across as shallow, quick to judge, having never faced down their vulnerabilities. On the flip side, those who had walked through fire usually developed a well of compassion and understanding you simply can't learn through easy living. They get that everyone is waging their own battles and that everyone wears a brave face to hide personal struggles. This insight makes them more forgiving of others' faults and more appreciative of small acts of kindness. He also found that creativity often sprouts from suffering. Some of his most powerful writing stemmed from his darkest times, the wounds from his younger years, the humiliation from dead-end jobs, the heartaches from failed relationships. All of these served as the raw material that fueled poems and stories resonating deeply with his readers. He figured out how to transform his pain into art. He didn't try to dress it up or make it sound pretty. Instead, he laid it out with such blunt honesty that it resonated with others who saw their own hardships reflected. This gave his pain a purpose, turning it into something significant beyond its immediate hurt. Bukowski also saw an almost spiritual layer to suffering. He understood that pain has a way of stripping life down to its essentials. When you're in true agony, you stop caring about things like status, appearance, or other people's opinions. You're left focusing on survival and what truly matters. As painful as this process is, it can also be liberating, shedding light on what's genuinely valuable and clearing out background noise. Some of his most insightful thoughts came when suffering peeled away everything non-essential, forcing him to confront reality directly. Bukowski wasn't one for hiding suffering or faking happiness when you weren't feeling it. He believed that pretending only made things worse, leaving people to suffer in silence. By laying his own pain bare for others to see, he let people recognize their own struggles rather than deny them. This honesty built a sense of connection among those who might otherwise feel isolated in their pain. He demonstrated that approaching pain with honesty and sharing it openly can actually bring people together instead of driving them apart. In Part 3, we deep dive into Bukowski's ongoing battle against what he saw as the soul-draining nature of modern work. He wasn't just wrestling with his inner demons. He was taking a swing at the whole capitalist system that puts profit on a pedestal over our basic human needs. His books, Post Office and Factotum, aren't just stories about dead-end gigs. They're a deep dive into how meaningless work can chip away at who we really are. Bukowski spent over 10 years sorting mail at the Los Angeles Post Office, stuck in a rut of mindless letter filing while trying to duck supervisors hollering for everyone to speed up. It was a job that was tough on the body, exhausting on the mind, and stripped folks of their human dignity. People were treated like interchangeable parts, expected to keep cranking out the same tasks at a mad pace with no room to think differently or speak up. Bukowski himself dealt with constant physical pain, but the mental strain? That was even harsher. He watched sharp, capable individuals turn into lifeless drones their spirits stamped out by endless demands for more productivity and no regard for basic human respect. What really hit Bukowski about the modern work scene was how it swallowed people whole. They'd spend their best hours doing pointless chores to line someone else's pockets, heading home utterly drained, barely able to glance at what actually mattered to them. Health, relationships, creativity, dreams, all tossed aside for the illusion of financial security that rarely held up. He saw this as self-imposed slavery, trading freedom and dignity for just enough pay to keep running in the same spot. Bukowski came to see most jobs in capitalism as essentially pointless, not truly serving real human needs, but existing just to pad business owners' wallets or sustain systems that cater to the rich. He cut through all the noise that tried to convince workers to feel pride in some vague contribution to society. He argued that if most office jobs suddenly disappeared, the world might function better. This insight allowed him to reject the idea that work was inherently honorable, regardless of what kind or for what purpose. His critique wasn't just about the economy. It was a deeper exploration of what meaningless work did to our minds. He saw it forcing people into splitting themselves into two, one half that danced through the workday hoops for a paycheck, and another half trying to hold onto any sense of true self. This divide followed them outside work, making it tougher to have independent thoughts, chase real interests, or build honest relationships. Work didn't just steal their hours, it stole their sense of self, leaving them feeling disconnected from their own dreams and talents. Bukowski showed a stark contrast with old-school types of work that had a direct connection to human needs. Picture a farmer growing food, a craftsman creating something useful, or an artist bringing beauty to the world. All tasks fruitful way beyond the dollars they might earn. In those roles, people could see their impact and feel good about contributing to the greater good. But with modern jobs, they often involved shuffling papers or crunching numbers without clear ties to anything genuinely helpful. Workers couldn't take pride in their efforts because they couldn't see how they made a difference. Through his character, Henry Chinaski, Bukowski represented a fight against this depersonalizing machine. Chinaski refused to spend his days shackled by work he couldn't stand. He'd regularly quit, get the boot, or just disappear when the nonsense became too much. He preferred dealing with poverty and uncertainty over the slow bleed of selling his time to bosses who saw him not as a person, but as a tool. This wasn't about laziness. It was a stand against a system that wanted him to swap his soul for mere survival. Chinaski came to the realization that holding on to his personal values was way more important than just securing a steady paycheck. Bukowski had this insight about how workplaces often reflected and propped up the broader power structures we see all around us. Many times, bosses and supervisors morphed into little tyrants, getting a kick out of the tiny bit of authority they held over others. It wasn't just about following orders, but more about making employees feel like they had to enjoy being taken advantage of. This kind of mental trickery often did more damage than not getting paid enough, because it warped people's sense of what they genuinely felt inside. Workers had to plaster on fake smiles while being treated poorly, act grateful for jobs they really couldn't stand, and suppress their natural reactions to being wronged. The author noticed the hollow promise that hard work would naturally lead to rising up the ranks. It was mostly just a tactic to keep everyone obedient. He realized that the people moving up weren't always the most diligent or talented, but rather those who were keen on playing the game and buttering up the right folks. In many companies, climbing the corporate ladder didn't have much to do with having real ability. Instead, the key to success was how well you could play the political game and fit in with the company's vibe. Because of this, those with genuineness and inventiveness often stalled in their careers, while the ones scheming flourished. The system seemed to reward the kind of behavior that chipped away at one's humanity. Bukowski wasn't interested in fixing this setup, but chose to distance himself from it as much as he could. He opted for a simple lifestyle, avoided getting entangled in debt, and kept his needs low-key, freeing himself from the financial chains that might lock him into jobs he hated. Once he found success as a writer, he fully embraced the freedom to write honestly about how work had impacted his own life and the lives of those he observed around him. Accumulating wealth wasn't his end game. He was more focused on the core dignity that comes with earning a living through work that held true to his own convictions. He wanted to inspire others to have the guts to reject the societal pressures urging them to swap their humanity for financial gain. Part 4. Authenticity in a world of masks. Being your genuine self, according to Bukowski, might just be the toughest challenge out there. It takes a special kind of courage that few folks really develop. Let's face it, in this day and age, being true to yourself is like a rebellious act. Society tends to applaud folks who fit the mold and tends to look down on those who dare to stand apart. Bukowski got this all too well. He dealt with rejection, criticism, and loneliness, all because he stuck to his guns. We start feeling the push to blend in right from childhood. Kids pick up real fast on what's okay with parents, teachers, and pals, and then hide the rest. Fast forward to adulthood, and most folks are such pros at playing the part that society expects, they lose touch with who they truly are. They kill it as the ideal employee or the perfect partner, but their real dreams and feelings are like strangers to them. To Bukowski, this disconnection was one of the big downsides of modern life. What made Bukowski stand out was how real he was about everything, even the parts that weren't so pretty. He was shockingly honest about his mess-ups and flaws, the kind of stuff most people keep under wraps. While many are busy polishing their public image, Bukowski put everything out there for the world to see, the ups and the downs. This raw honesty let readers see a reflection of their own hidden selves, creating a silent bond between them. For Bukowski, being real wasn't just about showing emotions. It was about being truthful in his thoughts, too. He didn't just jump on board with trendy ideas to seem smart or enlightened. If he had a different take, he'd voice it, even if it didn't boost his popularity or career. He preferred being a bit rough around the edges over compromising his beliefs just to fit in with the intellectual or social crowd. Bukowski got that being true means accepting the fallout that comes with it. Stop trying to make everyone happy, and some folks won't like you. Share a view that's not popular, and get ready for some blowback. Say no to playing the social games, and you might lose out on certain connections or chances. Bukowski took all that into account, but figured the freedom of being himself was a fair trade. He valued a handful of real connections over a heap of fake ones. He didn't shy away from owning his failures, avoiding the phony notion of being the perfect success. Bukowski wrote about his boozing, rocky relationships, money troubles, and personal mess-ups. Rather than pretending to have every answer, he showed himself as flawed and human, just like anyone else. This gave weight to his insights, since he was clearly someone still figuring things out, not an all-knowing guru dishing advice from a pedestal. He saw that many folks craft their personalities to win applause and dodge criticism. People highlight traits that get affirmed and suppress those that don't. These acts get so ingrained, folks forget they're acting. They mistake their social role for who they really are, losing track of their deeper, authentic self. Bukowski felt that peeling away the layers of social conditioning required a non-stop effort and a willingness to question everything you've been told you should be. He noted that social settings each had their own version of honesty and authenticity. Often, what passed for honesty among the middle class was more of a polished act, where folks revealed just enough to seem genuine without really laying anything too intimate out there. True authenticity, like Bukowski practiced, was riskier because it meant owning the wild, awkward, and socially frowned-upon parts of being human. It was about admitting to thoughts and feelings that might wreck your social standing or relationships if others got wind of them. This brand of truthfulness required a courage that's rare. Bukowski's way of being real also meant accepting the contradictions inside himself instead of trying to stick to one neat, consistent persona. He could be rude and considerate, cynical and hopeful, self-centered and generous, all within the same day or even conversation. Instead of trying to iron out these contradictions or hide the ones that didn't fit the image others expected, he embraced the full, messy reality of being human. This made him come across as more genuine than those trying to look good or consistently any one thing. He got that humans are naturally full of contradictions, and that trying to wipe them out leads to a kind of mental dead end. Bukowski believed the real measure of authenticity was if you could stay true to yourself when no one was around. A lot of folks are so accustomed to putting on a show for others that when there's nobody watching, they don't know how to simply be themselves. They get jittery with silence, uncomfortable with their own thoughts because they don't have anyone else to validate them or keep them occupied. Bukowski made peace with being alone, savoring his own thoughts and emotions without needing a crowd's approval or entertainment to feel fulfilled. This self-reliance was the core of his authenticity, as it showed he didn't depend on other people's reactions to see his own worth or the significance of his life. Part 5. Love as a Beautiful Mess. Bukowski had his own unique perspective on love, shaped by years of relationships that brought him both immense joy and deep sorrow. While some poets dreamt of love as a fairy tale and others avoided it altogether, Bukowski saw love as both magical and chaotic. His understanding didn't come from theories or books, but from tumultuous romances and painful breakups, those intense connections that had the power to lift you up or break you down, depending on how they unfolded. The heart of Bukowski's view on love was his relationship with Jane Cooney Baker, a widow who enjoyed her drinks and was a bit older than him, 11 years to be exact. Society might not have seen Jane as an ideal partner. She wasn't younger, thinner, or wealthier. She drank as much as he did, but their connection went much deeper than appearances or societal expectations. They understood each other's pain, found humor in life's absurdities, and supported each other in a world that hadn't been kind to either of them. When Jane passed away in 1962 from alcohol-related issues, Bukowski was left with a deep wound that changed his outlook on love forever. His experiences taught Bukowski that real love isn't about seeking perfection, but finding someone whose imperfections complement yours in a way that feels right. He and Jane were both flawed, but their flaws fit together, somehow making them stronger as a couple than they were on their own. This realization made him see that the search for an ideal partner is a misguided journey. Love doesn't magically make your problems vanish. Instead, it gives you someone to face them with. True love is about accepting someone completely, including their flaws, and knowing that they accept yours as well. Bukowski also understood that love comes with a built-in contradiction. The characteristics that draw you to someone might eventually be the same things that cause tension. The spontaneous and wild personality that initially attracts you might mean they're also unreliable. The fiery passion that ignites sparks might later lead to drama and stress. And the independence you originally admire could result in a hesitation to commit or compromise in the relationship. He encountered this paradox time and time again, falling for women who, because of those captivating traits, almost guaranteed the relationship would face challenges. Bukowski frequently wrote about how romantic relationships seem to follow a familiar pattern. In the early stages, both partners show off their best selves, keeping any flaws under wraps. This results in a period of exciting discovery where everything seems possible. But as time goes by and true personalities emerge, disillusionment sets in. Partners must confront the reality that their significant other isn't the dream they imagined, but an ordinary person with flaws like everyone else. Many relationships falter during this transition from fantasy to reality. In Women, Bukowski's book, he explores this cycle through a series of relationships that follow a similar path. The main character, Henry Chinaski, meets woman after woman, experiences brief moments of connection, and then watches as the relationship unravels due to incompatible desires, unrealistic expectations, or simple human weaknesses. Yet, despite the heartbreak, Chinaski continues in his pursuit of love. He understands that even short-lived relationships offer genuine moments that give life meaning. The pain of losing those connections is the price paid for those precious instances of intimacy. Additionally, Bukowski explored how love often becomes a battlefield for control. People use sex, affection, and emotional tactics to influence their partners and fulfill their needs. They might withhold love as punishment or offer it as a reward, utilizing the threat of withdrawal as leverage in the relationship. Bukowski saw these dynamics play out in his life and those around him. He realized that playing power games in relationships usually messes up the genuine emotions that started everything, turning what was once love into a sort of battle where everyone ends up losing. But Bukowski also remembered that there were moments when the games stopped and real closeness could happen. These times were often fragile and short, where both people completely let down their defenses and saw each other for who they really were, without any hidden motives. During those moments, he felt a connection and understanding that made all the struggles and pain worthwhile. He learned to appreciate these moments while they lasted, without holding on to the idea that they should be forever or trying to drag them out beyond their natural course. Accepting that life is temporary allowed him to enjoy love when it was around, without letting its end wreck him. Bukowski wasn't on board with the common idea that love always brings happiness. From what he'd been through, love often made you feel miserable because it opened you up to getting hurt, feeling jealous, having disappointments, and dealing with losses. But love also made him feel truly alive, able to experience deep emotions, and better connected to his and others' humanity. He would rather experience the highs and lows of love and loss than play it safe and feel nothing. This attitude kept him on the lookout for new relationships, even though he knew they might end badly based on his past. He understood that avoiding the risk of pain meant accepting a dull life where nothing really mattered, because you've shut down your emotions. Deep down, Bukowski knew that love reveals more about who you really are than anything else. When you're in love, it's tougher to keep up your defenses and the act you usually put on. You might find yourself feeling jealous, needy, or behaving unreasonably in ways that are out of character. But you might also discover a capacity for kindness, tenderness, and selflessness you didn't realize you had. Love cuts you to your core, showing both the good and bad sides of you. For Bukowski, this insight, however painful, was precious, because it helped him gain a better understanding of himself and write about human nature with more truth and depth. Part 6. Many people get nervous about being solo, but for Bukowski, flying solo wasn't just important, it was essential to keep his life authentic. His relationship with being alone was complicated and changed over time, but it became a crucial aspect of his idea of living truthfully in a world that's constantly pushing you to blend in and wear masks. Solitude, for him, wasn't a lonely place. It was like this special corner where he could connect with himself, free from everyone else's distorted views. Early on, Bukowski realized he wasn't like most folks, and that made socializing exhausting and, at times, downright unpleasant. Growing up with hardship and neglect, he learned that people often bring pain rather than comfort. As he got older, he saw that his beliefs and lifestyle didn't fit the typical mold. Instead of trying to fit in, he embraced his outsider status and crafted a life that honored his need for independence and space. He understood why many dread being alone. They aren't at peace with themselves and drown it out with constant noise and interactions, running from their own thoughts and feelings. This avoidance prevents them from really knowing themselves or building inner strength. They wind up leaning on external validation and thrills, losing the ability to shape their own purpose. To Bukowski, this reliance was like a mental shackle, making them easy to control and sway. For Bukowski, solitude was where his world truly existed. That was his time to write, think, read, and feel deeply. While social gatherings were sometimes necessary and occasionally enjoyable, they usually required him to put on a version of himself that others could handle. Only alone could he be completely honest, letting his contradictions and complexities be. So, being alone wasn't just comforting. It was vital to keep his true self intact. Spending time by himself also fueled his creativity. Bukowski saw that his best work happened after periods of following his own pace, without others around. Even pleasant social moments could interrupt this internal flow, making it hard to access the depths where his creative energy lay. He learned to protect his solitude fiercely, even if it meant others were left wanting more of his time. Bukowski also realized solitude helps you figure out whether you want to be with someone or feel like you have to be. When you're content on your own, you enter relationships from a place of true affection, not out of fear of loneliness. This makes connections more authentic, untainted by desperation or avoidance of self. Many folks who fear being alone end up in relationships for the wrong reasons, staying with incompatible partners because it beats facing solitude. He figured out the difference between solitude that nurtures and isolation that harms. Productive solitude is chosen. It's for reflection, creativity, or simply enjoying your own company, while destructive isolation stems from fear, anger, or sadness, leading nowhere good. Bukowski had his battles with both, but gradually nurtured the healthy kind, while avoiding the harmful. He learned to be alone without becoming bitter, without completely shutting off the outside world. Being alone also taught Bukowski about feeling lonely. Loneliness is that hollow feeling of being disconnected, which can strike even in a crowded room, reminding him that solitude and loneliness aren't even close to being the same thing. Being on your own is just a state of being that can become a space full of wealth, serenity, and contentment if you learn to appreciate it. He figured out that some of his most joyful and fulfilling moments happened when he was completely solo, engrossed in a captivating book, jotting down his thoughts, or simply watching life pass by without needing to share or explain it to someone else. The introspective side of Bukowski realized that solitude was crucial for developing a truly independent mind. Constantly being around other people's ideas, expectations, and emotions can make it hard to determine what you truly think or feel. Even if it's gentle and well-meaning, social influence can steer your responses, making it tough to form honest opinions about meaningful subjects. It was in solitude that he could deeply reflect, without worrying about how his thoughts might affect his connections or reputation. To him, this freedom of thought was essential, both as a writer and as an individual. Bukowski also discovered that being alone allowed him to confront life's grand mysteries. Once the noise of social interactions subsided, he became more attuned to profound questions about meaning, death, and the essence of reality itself. These encounters with the unknown could be intimidating, yet they were also transformative and enlightening. They reminded him that personal human experiences, no matter how intense, were just one small part of a much larger cosmic puzzle, which brought clarity. This wider perspective, mostly found in his solitary moments, helped him stay level-headed and maintain his sense of humor, even during the hardest times. In Part 7, titled The Hollowness of Success and the American Dream, Bukowski experienced an era in America where hard work, fitting in, and maintaining a positive outlook were believed to bring wealth and happiness. He closely observed these promises and realized that the American dream was not only deceptive, but also harmful to people's well-being. His criticism went beyond just financial aspects, delving into the psychological and philosophical impacts, showing how chasing conventional success took a toll on people's souls, driving true satisfaction further away. Bukowski understood that the American dream was built on significant misconceptions about human nature and what makes life truly meaningful. The first major delusion was the idea that happiness could be attained by acquiring more possessions. He noticed that those who accumulated wealth often became more anxious and less content, realizing that money couldn't resolve the deeper struggles of finding purpose and building meaningful connections in life. Another misconception was that high status and recognition would ensure happiness. He observed how successful people became trapped in maintaining images that didn't reflect their true selves. The third fallacy was the belief that competition and achievement were innate drives that would naturally result in contentment. Bukowski, after achieving success in writing, felt the emptiness of such achievements. As his books sold and gained critical acclaim, he discovered success came with its own set of complications. People expected him to stick to the formula that brought him fame, resisting any growth or change as an artist. There was an expectation for him to be grateful and humble, even when he knew that luck significantly contributed to his accomplishments. Fame attracted people interested in his public persona rather than his true self, making it hard to cultivate real relationships. Bukowski noticed how the pursuit of success altered people in ways they often didn't realize. To achieve their goals, individuals frequently suppressed parts of themselves that might hinder their progress. They became more focused on appearances and more willing to compromise their principles in pursuit of advantage. Gradually, these compromises accumulated until they lost sight of what truly drove them. They'd reach their goals only to realize they had become someone different from the person who initially dreamed those dreams. The success felt like it belonged to this new version of themselves, not the original thinker. He also recognized how the idea of future success was used to justify present unhappiness. People remained in jobs they detested, stayed in unfulfilling relationships, and led empty lives believing their sacrifices would eventually lead to happiness. This mindset of always anticipating a better future left people living in a constant state of waiting, always chasing a tomorrow when they could finally relax and enjoy life. But when tomorrow arrived, if it ever did, they often discovered they couldn't appreciate simple pleasures, as their notions of happiness were shaped by advertisements and societal expectations rather than their genuine desires. Bukowski contrasted these consumer-oriented goals with the simpler joys he discovered personally. Enjoyments like diving into a great book, writing with sincerity, having an authentic conversation, watching the sunset, or feeling at peace with oneself required no money, status, or external validation. These joys were available to anyone willing to slow down and pay attention to the present rather than continually reaching for something grander. Yet, the culture of success made these simple pleasures seem inadequate or signs of a lack of ambition. This perspective also fostered a sense of false scarcity, teaching that value was something to be measured against others instead of being absolute. Instead of feeling content with what they had, people were driven to constantly compare themselves to others, feeling dissatisfied whenever someone else seemed to have more. This mindset made contentment elusive because there would always be someone wealthier, more famous, or more accomplished to envy. Bukowski dismissed this competitive viewpoint, choosing instead to focus on whether his own needs were met rather than comparing himself to others. This approach allowed him to find happiness with relatively little, while those with much more remained chronically unhappy. He figured out that the idea of the American dream was particularly damaging because it suggested that anyone could hit it big if they simply put in enough effort. However, this notion overlooked the real hurdles in society that blocked many from achieving that success. It ended up creating a situation where people who didn't succeed were blamed for supposedly not working hard enough or not wanting it enough. Bukowski saw through this deception, as his own life experiences had shown him that success often depended on things beyond a person's control, like luck, timing, upbringing, and even genetics. He came to see how this myth of success mainly served those already at the top, making social inequality seem natural and justified. More importantly, Bukowski realized that chasing traditional success often meant turning into someone you never wanted to become. In competitive environments, people often needed to be crafty, deceitful, and ready to walk over others to advance. The drive to win often trumped fairness. The chase for wealth eclipsed caring for others, and focusing on appearances took precedence over what truly mattered. The characteristics that brought external achievements often conflicted with inner calm and real human relationships. This meant that pursuing the American dream frequently involved abandoning the values that once gave life its true meaning. Part 8. For Bukowski, death wasn't some distant concept. It was a palpable force that heavily shaped his outlook on life and its priorities. His health issues, watching people close to him pass away, and seeing how death strips away life's illusions made him fully embrace life's temporary nature. Instead of shying away from thinking about death, Bukowski let the idea guide him to what really mattered. He had a close brush with death early on when Jane Cooney Baker died in 1962. Her death, due to alcohol, hit him hard and made him realize that love and loss are inextricably linked. Losing her forced him to confront how fleeting everything he held dear was, but instead of diminishing their worth, it made them more precious to him. Knowing he didn't have forever, he learned to love more fully, aware that chances for real connection were limited. His awareness of mortality helped him slice through life's superficial concerns and zero in on its truly meaningful aspects. Understanding that everyone will eventually die made worries about social status, judgment from others, and accumulation of things seem trivial to him. This gave Bukowski a clear path to focus on true relationships, his passion for writing, and soaking up real beauty and honesty. Everything else was just noise. He observed that not everyone faced death head-on like he did. Some tried to guard themselves with wealth, influence, or fame, thinking it would fend off death. Others rushed to cram as much living as possible into their lives. And some chose to ignore death entirely, pretending it would never touch them. Bukowski, on the other hand, accepted it as a natural part of life, using that realization to live more authentically. If we're all going to die anyway, why spend time trying to please others or pursue empty goals? Bukowski's own health hurdles, like surviving a severe bleeding ulcer in his 40s, brought home how death can clarify life's real priorities. While he recuperated, he saw that his previous concerns didn't matter much when compared to the sheer gift of being alive. This breakthrough prompted him to quit his dull postal job and throw himself into writing, even if it meant embracing financial instability. The prospect of being broke was minor compared to wasting time on work that crushed his spirit. He also pondered how knowing death is a sure thing made some forms of suffering seem absurd. People got hung up on embarrassments, failures, and old grudges. Trivial in the grand scheme of life, they let ego block reconciliation with loved ones. From the angle that life is short and everyone dies eventually, such dramas appeared like a major waste of the time available for genuine connection and joy. This perspective softened him toward himself and others, allowing him to focus on what could still be enjoyed or fixed. Thinking about death led Bukowski to treasure life's simple pleasures even more. A good meal, a breathtaking sunset, sharing laughter, or writing the perfect line gained depth when he viewed them as limited experiences. This wasn't morbid, but life-affirming, since it kept him from taking anything good for granted or expecting it to last indefinitely. He learned to relish the here and now instead of rushing toward some unknown future contentment. Bukowski wasn't sold on the idea of an afterlife or achieving immortality through his work. He didn't believe death meant ascending to a better place, or that his writings would guarantee his legacy forever. Accepting that life ends motivated him to focus on the present instead of dreaming beyond the grave. Knowing this life was all there was, he set out to make it matter. This mindset nudged him to fully dive into the moment rather than postpone happiness. Ultimately, Bukowski felt that accepting death's inevitability liberated him. It stripped away many of the fears others let dictate their lives. When you come to grips with your mortality, the anxiety about fitting in, financial insecurity, or looking foolish loses its potency. Those things might hurt, but they aren't the end of the world. Since he knew death was inevitable, he didn't see much point in stressing about avoiding minor discomforts. This fearlessness gave him the guts to speak bluntly and stick to his convictions instead of bending to social norms. In a strange twist, confronting death taught him how to genuinely live. Part 9. In Bukowski's eyes, the only way to genuinely understand truth and gain wisdom was to live life directly. He wasn't one to put his faith in theories or secondhand knowledge unless it was backed up by real-world experience. This approach led him to champion a belief system that revolved around diving headfirst into raw experience. For him, true understanding came not from studying or pondering, but by engaging fully with the different aspects of human life, even those harsh and messy parts most people avoid. Bukowski perceived that many people seemed out of touch with reality. They tended to view the world through a filter of other people's opinions, societal expectations, and abstract theories, which distorted their perception of what was really happening around them. They might say they understood love, work, success, and the meaning of life, but their understanding was often limited to how these topics were shown in movies or talked about in society. On the flip side, Bukowski chose to lean on what his own eyes and experiences told him. Committed to experiencing life as it was, he deliberately put himself in situations others would avoid. He spent time with alcoholics, criminals, and folk society often sidelines, not because he idealized their lifestyles, but because he wanted to get the full picture of human experience. He took on low-paying jobs, lived simply, and got involved in tumultuous relationships, believing that comfort and security didn't reveal much about someone's true character. Adversity and loss were better teachers than success and joy, since they stripped away pretense, exposing one's true self. This approach carried over into his writing. Bukowski didn't bother with dressing up his words to make them sound nice or to push any specific idea. He put his raw feelings, real thoughts, and gritty experiences onto paper, with no concern for making himself appear a certain way. His writing embraced hangovers, failures, meanness, flings, and despair just as openly as it did rare moments of beauty or enlightenment. This dedication to authenticity over polished narratives made his work hit closer to the bone of human experience than the neat stories most writers preferred to craft. Bukowski realized that facing raw realities often contradicted commonly accepted notions of how life should work. Society promoted the idea that goodness brings rewards, effort pays off, love triumphs, and justice prevails. But he found life was less tidy and fair. Good people suffered misfortune, and undeserving ones prospered. Exceptional talent went unnoticed, while mediocrity basked in praise. And love didn't always end well. Rather than dressing up these uncomfortable truths in comforting cliches, he presented them plainly, letting readers draw their own conclusions. Because he believed so strongly in the power of raw experience, Bukowski was always open to shifting his views in light of new insights, instead of clinging to outdated beliefs. He didn't shy away from admitting when he was wrong and adjusted his beliefs when new life experiences taught him something different. This flexibility was rare among writers, who often stuck firmly to their original ideas even if they no longer held true. Bukowski's loyalty to truth over maintaining consistency infused his work with a dynamic and evolving energy, steering clear of being dogmatic or overly didactic. This mindset also shaped how he viewed himself. He didn't cling to a static view of who he was or map out a predetermined path for personal growth. Instead, he let life shape his personality and beliefs, changing as new challenges arose. He examined his own actions, contradictions, and development with the same impartial curiosity he applied to observing others. Instead of sticking with those usual self-help tricks, he developed a deep understanding of himself by being completely honest. This honesty gave him a special talent for getting people, making his writing hit home when it came to human nature, unlike those writers who tried to make themselves look good. Bukowski understood that real experiences were about the body as much as the heart and mind. He really paid attention to what his body told him: hunger, tiredness, wants, and pain, realizing these feelings were as important as mental or emotional ones in shaping who you are and how you see the world. But this idea of learning through the body didn't exactly gel with the thinkers who put the brain on a pedestal. For Bukowski, though, the body had truths about the world that you just couldn't discover only through thinking. Feeling hungry taught you about need, pain showed your boundaries, and physical joy revealed happiness in ways that overthinking couldn't. He figured out that fully embracing raw experiences meant letting go of certain comforts and illusions that people often cling to. It meant confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself and reality that you'd prefer to ignore. You needed to be open to having your beliefs challenged and your dreams somewhat shattered, all in pursuit of a clearer understanding of how things truly work. Many folks couldn't handle this, preferring comforting fantasies over harsh truths. But in Bukowski's eyes, it was a worthwhile exchange because it led to a more authentic and fulfilling way of living, even if that fulfillment came with its share of pain and lost dreams. In Part 10, Bukowski dove into the topic of anti-intellectualism and his belief in the kind of wisdom you get from everyday life experiences. He wasn't against learning itself, but he had serious doubts about formal education and the snooty attitude that sometimes comes with it. He thought real understanding came from actually living life, not just reading about it. This view put him at odds with literary circles that valued academic accolades and theoretical smarts over the real-life insights Bukowski gained from facing poverty, failure, and being sidelined by society. His stance on anti-intellectualism didn't come from a lack of knowledge. It was a conscious choice to put more trust in real-life observations than in what traditional wisdom taught. Bukowski saw how formal education sometimes disconnected people from their raw reactions to real-life events. Students often learn to see the world through established theories instead of developing their own views and judgments. While they get good at analyzing and categorizing experiences, they lose the knack for directly connecting with life without trying to fit it into pre-made boxes. Bukowski found it both sad and laughable that educated folks often ended up distanced from their true experiences. They might know what scholars say about life's big questions like love and death, but they missed out on living those truths themselves. His real education came from mixing with people society often overlooked. Whether it was at the post office, dimly lit bars, the racetrack, or cheap apartments, he met folks whose sharp insights were never acknowledged by formal institutions, but who had a deep understanding of human nature and survival. These people couldn't rely on impressing anyone in academia. They had to be streetwise, learning to accurately read people and situations because their lives depended on it. Their wisdom came from tough life experiences, not from books. Bukowski also noticed how intellectualism was often used as emotional armor, letting people dodge the hard realities they faced. Intellectuals would dissect their problems, theorize about relationships, and analyze their suffering from a distance, keeping them from facing their feelings directly. This brainy approach stopped them from learning the valuable lessons that pain teaches and from developing the kind of emotional toughness that comes only from dealing with feelings head-on. Bukowski valued the raw honesty of people who couldn't hide behind fancy words. They had to face life up close. His criticism of academic analysis extended to how art and literature were analyzed. He saw scholars pull art apart with precision, digging into context and symbolism, but missing the emotional punch that made these works special to begin with. This approach treated art like a puzzle rather than a heartfelt message between people. It valued interpretation over experience and knowledge over emotion, creating a barrier between the audience and the deep truths that great art aimed to convey. Bukowski wanted his writing to hit people's hearts and gut feelings, not just their analytical brains. He recognized how intellectual snobbery often stopped people from learning from unusual sources. The wisdom of bartenders, factory workers, and folks on the street got ignored because they didn't have fancy credentials, even though their insights into human nature were often spot on. This kind of intellectual arrogance shut educated folks off from the wisdom right in front of them, keeping them confined to what was stamped with official approval. Bukowski stayed open to learning from anyone whose life experience had given them genuine insights into how life really works. He saw intellectualism as a shield that often masked cruelty and indifference. It shocked him how politicians, economists, and planners could discuss policies that tore apart real lives with the kind of detachment one might have when analyzing a chess game. They seemed totally out of touch with the actual effects their plans had on people, always chasing theories that looked good on paper but ended up causing chaos in reality. Bukowski was all about focusing on real-life experiences, and this made him skeptical of methods that ignored what people genuinely felt and needed. In his eyes, cold, impersonal theories were more than just unhelpful. They were dangerous. He also realized that being smart often replaced true self-awareness and personal growth. People could spend years digging into psychology, philosophy, or literature, but still avoid facing their own actions, fears, or motivations. They'd become gurus on human nature and theory, all while being clueless about their own inner workings. This gave them an odd sense of superiority, allowing them to skip the hard work of actually improving themselves. For Bukowski, he'd prefer hanging out with those who admitted to not knowing themselves over those who thought studying others unlocked their own mysteries. Still, Bukowski didn't just throw away the value of thinking or learning. He was a big reader and got lots of inspiration from guys like Dostoevsky, Hemingway, and Henry Miller, writers who blended deep thinking with raw emotion. What he couldn't stand was the overly academic way of thinking that split thought from feeling and knowledge from what was happening in the real world. He loved ideas that sprang from life itself, ones that could really solve real-world issues. His kind of wisdom was the sort that helped people have better lives, not the type that was just there to impress or show off to other intellectuals. For Bukowski, intelligence had worth only if it grounded itself in real life and wasn't used as an escape from the messiness and truth of being human. Part 11. The Futility of Trying to Save Others. Bukowski came to a harsh realization that trying to save people from themselves is often a lost cause, no matter how much you care for them or how obvious it seems to you what they should do differently. This hit home for him after seeing loved ones spiral down due to addiction or bad decisions, and every time he tried stepping in, it just blew up in his face. It was a tough truth to accept because it meant realizing love and good intentions couldn't shield those around him from their own self-inflicted pain. Reflecting on his time with Jane Cooney Baker, Bukowski saw this lesson shine brightest. He adored Jane and watched as her drinking habits tore her apart. But any time he attempted to suggest she cut back, it only provoked arguments and resentment. She would vow to reduce her drinking, yet often ended up consuming even more, sometimes secretly, to dodge his disappointment. Eventually, Bukowski understood that his well-meaning worry seemed like criticism and control to Jane rather than love. The harder he tried to save her, the more she withdrew and sank deeper into her destructive ways. This taught him a hard lesson. The urge to rescue someone, even if they're clearly spiraling, often transforms into a form of aggression. He noticed similar situations in countless other relationships around him. Parents, eager to protect their kids from mistakes, end up pushing them away with too much control and critique. Friends attempting to drag their pals out of bad spots find themselves shut out. Therapists and social workers trying to save their unwilling clients eventually burn out from the thanklessness of their efforts. Repeatedly, it became obvious that the urge to help tended to reflect more about the people wanting to save than it did about the person in trouble. Bukowski realized this drive often sprang from his discomfort at witnessing someone else suffer, rather than genuine compassion. Watching a loved one descend into destructive behaviors fuels anxiety and a sense of helplessness, which the act of helping can temporarily relieve, even if that help isn't needed or appreciated. The would-be rescuer feels useful and righteous, avoiding the tougher task of simply being there with someone in their struggle without trying to change it. This turned helping into a selfish endeavor disguised as generosity, where the need to feel needed trumps the genuine needs of the person suffering. Bukowski also observed that many folks were more attached to their problems than they were to fixing them. Their struggles brought identity, attention, and drama, things they weren't ready to relinquish even when solutions were clear. Whether battling addiction, enduring chaotic relationships, or enduring financial turmoil, many found these struggles filled psychological roles they couldn't yet replace with healthier choices. Until someone truly wanted to change, all the advice, support, and resources in the world would be fruitless or even counterproductive. Real change couldn't be imposed externally. It had to come from within, sparked by a true desire for a different life. Bukowski discovered that embracing the fact that you can't save others might be a more loving approach than trying to intervene. By letting go of the urge to alter someone, you allow them to be themselves, rather than constantly expressing dissatisfaction with who they are. This acceptance encouraged deeper connections, since the person didn't feel a need to fend off change attempts. They could speak openly about their issues without fearing unsolicited judgment or advice, which sometimes made them more inclined to seek help when genuinely ready. Oddly enough, taking a step back often created room for people to change on their own terms. This perspective extended to Bukowski's views beyond personal relationships to societal and political change. While he was highly aware of social injustices and suffering around him, he maintained a healthy skepticism towards most organized efforts to reform or make improvements. He noticed something. Many people diving into social movements were more about the buzz of being morally superior than actually making a difference for those in need. The tricky part with social issues is that the attempts at change often backfired, creating new problems rather than solving the old ones. This didn't mean he was detached from the pain around him. It just meant he saw the limits of what a single person could achieve against massive systemic challenges. This way of thinking also shaped how he viewed his own writing. He put his thoughts and experiences out there with honesty, but didn't hold on to the hope that his words would transform someone's life. If, by chance, what he wrote helped someone feel less isolated or nudged them toward being more honest about their own life, that was great, but it wasn't his main goal. Writing was a personal thing, something he did for himself, not because he thought it was a magic fix for the world's or human nature's problems. This lack of a savior complex in his work helped avoid sounding preachy, unlike those writers who aim to lecture or reform their audience. Most importantly, Bukowski figured out that often the best way to help others was by starting with yourself. Living authentically and owning your choices set a real-life example for others who might want to follow. This method of influencing, a kind of show, don't tell approach, proved more effective than trying to convince people with words. People were more inclined to get inspired by someone who did the hard work to better themselves rather than by someone who just told others how to live. The most profound way you could support others was by just being true to yourself and letting them see what living honestly looked like. In Part 12, we dive into how Bukowski's thoughts on getting older transformed over time. When he was a young rebel, he saw aging as waving the white flag. But as the years went on, he began to find some unexpected wisdom and even a bit of peace in growing old. This change in how he saw aging became a big part of how he thought about life, showing that experiences don't just teach you facts, they can change your whole way of living. Unlike many writers who reach a high point early and just keep repeating themselves, Bukowski kept changing, even in his 70s. Back in his youth, Bukowski thought getting older meant saying goodbye to all the fun stuff. To him, aging was all about giving in, becoming boring, and watching your dreams slip away. He couldn't stand middle-aged folks, thinking they were overly cautious and dull. He swore he'd never be like them, even if it meant living fast and dying young to keep his edge. This mindset made him live wildly, drinking too much and taking risks as if he had to suck every bit of life dry before age caught up with him. But as Bukowski himself got older, he realized he'd been wrong about a lot of those ideas. Instead of losing his zest for life, he discovered that aging brought its own kind of depth and a sense of appreciation that being young just couldn't give. The panic he felt in his younger years calmed down to a relaxed, more thoughtful way of living. He started to love the simple things he used to call boring, like a calm night at home, a good meal, or deep talks with his wife, Linda Lee. Those moments became even more satisfying than the wild life he chased in his younger days. With age, Bukowski found a type of freedom that young people rarely taste. As he aged and became less focused on looks or the chase for romance, he broke free from the social dramas that used to mess with his relationships. Women interested in him later in his life were drawn to his mind and character more than anything else, allowing him to form real connections based on mutual respect rather than fleeting passions. It was freeing not having to prove himself or seek attention. Growing older gave him a new angle on old woes and obsessions. Problems that used to feel huge seemed less pressing, turning out to be just temporary bumps that sorted themselves out without any grand gestures. This view helped him be patient with current issues, confident they too would resolve in time. He could tell the difference between things that needed fixing right away and those that just needed patience. This newfound patience turned out to be a huge perk of getting older. Surprisingly, Bukowski found his writing improved as he aged. His later works had a depth and richness that his earlier, though full of energy and unique writings, didn't quite hit. With decades under his belt, he had a bigger pool of experience and a deeper grasp of human nature. He tackled love, loss, and mortality with the kind of authority that comes from living through these things time and again. His writing got crisper, using fewer words with more punch, moving away from the extra fluff of his earlier style. The physical challenges of getting older taught Bukowski a lot about adjustment and letting go. As his body became less reliable and his energy dipped, he had to pick and choose how he spent his time. Strangely enough, being picky about where he put his energy ended up making his life better, helping him focus on what really mattered and ditch the stuff and people that didn't add true value to his life. As the years went by, he got better at saying no to social gatherings, job opportunities, and personal favors that he once felt he had to accept just to keep others happy. His physical health started to set natural limits, helping him prioritize what really counted. Growing older also brought a shift in how Bukowski thought about death. It stopped being this terrifying idea and became something he could accept. Watching friends and colleagues pass away, along with his own health issues, made death feel less distant and more woven into the fabric of life. This closeness to the end game made him laser-focused on what he wanted to accomplish and took away the stress of planning too far ahead. If the future might not be there, why get tangled up in worries about things that'll take years to unfold or big schemes for later on? This new focus on the present made his remaining time feel more valuable and fulfilling. What really caught him off guard was how aging brought a sense of calm he'd never felt before. All that fiery anger and restlessness that powered his early work mellowed into acceptance and even a touch of happiness. He stopped fighting so fiercely against life's hurdles and struggles, figuring out that being content often comes from seeing things as they are. It wasn't about surrendering, it was about wisely choosing which battles mattered and finding joy in making the most of what life offered. Older Bukowski was steadier and wiser than his younger rebellious self, yet he clung to just enough grit to keep his writing raw and captivating. Getting older also changed how he valued life's different phases. Instead of viewing them as simply steps toward decline, he saw the beauty in each stage. Sure, youth had its energy and endless doors waiting to be opened, but age brought with it wisdom and fresh insights that were equally precious. Rather than mourning what he lost, he learned to appreciate the wisdom and depth he gained from sticking around long enough to truly see life for what it is. This wider perspective made him more empathetic towards people at all stages of life and helped him find meaning and joy, no matter what age he found himself in. Part 13. For Charles Bukowski, scribbling away wasn't about climbing any career ladder or chasing the limelight. For him, penning down words was as essential as finding food, getting a roof over his head, or even taking a breath. Without this outlet to spill his life into words, he was sure he'd have gone nuts or hit rock bottom way before any hint of success showed up. To him, art wasn't just some highbrow entertainment. It was a lifeline, shaping how he poured himself into his work and what he hoped it would do for both himself and those picking up his books. Early on, Bukowski realized that by jotting down the goings-on of his life, he could better grasp and cope with situations that might have otherwise crushed him. Be it clashes with his old man, feeling like he didn't fit in, slugging through dreary jobs, or nursing a broken heart, spinning these real-life tales into candid narratives somehow made them bearable. His writing wasn't about getting better or healing in the traditional sense. Rather, it was his way of turning gritty life into something that could be understood, worked through, and shared with others facing similar bumps in the road. By putting things into words, he molded the seemingly wild and trivial events into something meaningful. Bukowski saw art as a bridge that spanned those lonely life bits, linking them with significant connections. Through his work, he reached out to folks who had been down similar rough roads, skirting around the social niceties often demanded by face-to-face mingling. His books gave him a platform to express thoughts far too raw for regular chit-chat. His readers could dive into his world at their own pace, free from the need to jump into immediate conversation or worry about what he'd think of their reactions. This setup led to a unique intimacy, one that often felt more authentic than many in-person interactions, because it thrived on raw honesty, untouched by social niceties. Moreover, Bukowski looked at art as a way to shine a light on stories of those often pushed aside, those on the fringes, the everyday folks whose tales don't typically make it into the history books. He saw his writing as a way of documenting a lifestyle and viewpoint that mainstream culture generally skipped over. His words aimed to piece together a collection of experiences that could offer future readers a peek into the life lived on society's edge during mid-20th century America. For Bukowski, art wasn't merely about highlighting the hidden or the ignored. It was his way of staking a claim on his existence and place in a world that seemed not to see him. Despite all the messages from society suggesting his experiences didn't matter because he wasn't wealthy, well-schooled, or well-connected, his words boldly asserted that his life story was just as significant as anyone else's. Each poem and tale served as a loud response against the forces trying to look down on him. By turning his life into art, he transformed what many might brush off as mundane into something with the potential to stick around longer than he would. It wasn't about being over the top, but about showing what human dignity looked like through creative expression. On top of filling his soul and mind, art was Bukowski's financial fallback. Writing became the way he paid the bills without falling into the trap of a mind-numbing 9-to-5. It was crucial for him to gain financial independence, since he wasn't the kind to fit comfortably in a regular job setting. His distinct personality, strong values, and craving for freedom made typical job roles a poor fit for him. So, art wasn't some hobby. It was his breadwinner. This necessity injected a certain rawness and honesty into his work that might have been absent if writing were just one of many options. On top of all that, Bukowski discovered that art wasn't just his personal lifesaver. It could also be a lifeline for his readers. He got a ton of letters from people sharing how his books had really helped them. Whether it was feeling less lonely, being more open about their issues, or just getting a bit of relief during rough patches, his writing connected with them. It wasn't because his work was all sunshine and motivation. Instead, he managed to show his readers that they weren't alone in their struggles, that others had faced the same battles and pulled through. His ability to endure became a ray of hope, a sign that they too could persevere even when everything seemed pretty grim. Through his writing, he forged a connection among people who might never cross paths, but still understood the feeling of not fitting in and dealing with life's hurdles. He scoffed at the romantic notion of artists needing to suffer for their craft, but got that a lot of art stemmed from trying to make sense of difficult times. People whose lives were smooth and easy didn't usually feel that burning need to create because they didn't have that itch to change things or break free from their comfort zones. Art came from that space between life as it was and life as it could be. It came from the longing and restlessness that made people envision better realities. It didn't mean artists should chase misery, but it explained why so many great works came from those who'd been through the ringer. For Bukowski, using art as a lifeline meant he never took writing lightly. He understood how fragile creativity was, how easily it could be smothered by bad situations, a wrong frame of mind, or excessive stress. This awareness made him very protective of his creative space and cautious about anything that could disrupt it. He kept away from literary circles, avoided teaching gigs, and steered clear of paths that might propel his career but threaten his authenticity or creative freedom. To him, being able to write authentically meant more than the outward signs of a successful writing career, because the role of art in his survival was too vital to compromise for outside validation. Part 14. Finding the funny side of life's nonsense. Even when his work seemed shadowed by dark themes, Bukowski had this amazing ability to laugh at how absurd life can be. He understood that what makes you weep today might just make you chuckle tomorrow, if you look at it differently. He wasn't laughing out of some hidden bitterness. He genuinely saw how big the divide was between who we think we are and who we actually turn out to be. This sense of humor was like a lifesaver for him, making even his most depressing thoughts easier for folks to digest. Bukowski loved showcasing the ridiculous lengths people would go to just to hold on to some sense of dignity, even when the situation seemed undignified. He'd craft funny tales about his own flawed attempts to appear cool or collected when he was clearly floundering. By poking fun at himself, he gave himself permission to laugh at others as well, without cruelty. His humor wasn't about feeling superior, but sprang from the realization that we're all a bit silly in our own ways. We all stumble through life with fragmented truths and inflated egos, making his humor relatable to everyone. He found endless amusement in pointing out the gap between what institutions claim to be and what they truly are. Take the post office, for example, claiming efficient delivery, but for Bukowski, it was a place of chaos, power struggles, and laughable disorder. Universities, those supposed centers of wisdom, seemed like places for collecting degrees rather than learning. This wasn't about spite. It was more about exposing how people rationalize a flawed system. The real humor lay in how seriously people took these clearly imperfect setups. Bukowski also had a field day with love's many predictable fiascos. People always assumed that the latest romance would break the chain of past failures, only to make the same blunders with someone new. They'd fall for fantasies instead of facing reality, ignore glaring problems, and act shocked when things unraveled. It was amusing because Bukowski saw himself as part of this cycle of hopeless romantics repeating the same slip-ups over and over. Instead of seeing it as tragic, he found it a tender jest at our never-ending optimism. In his eyes, the biggest joke was how life seemed rigged to never quite meet our expectations. People longed for stability in an unpredictable world, lasting significance in a fleeting life, and a mission in a universe that didn't seem to care. Instead of getting frustrated, Bukowski found humor in accepting life as it was. It was almost laughable how creatures that could dream of heaven were anchored in a reality that didn't comply. The mismatch was comedic, making laughter a kind of hidden insight. His humor served to deflate the overblown sense of self-importance people love to puff up. People acted way too serious while chasing after things that ultimately didn't matter or masking themselves with social pretenses. His jokes deflated these swollen egos, reminding everyone that beneath the facade, we're just beings trying to survive and reproduce. This wasn't meant to be harsh, but to offer relief from our charades. For Bukowski, humor was like a spoonful of something sweet, helping the tougher truths go down easier. Tackling life's harshest realities head-on often left people in denial or despair. But wrapping those truths in laughter, now that gave people the ability to accept and even appreciate them. When we laugh, it kind of puts some space between us and the problems we're dealing with, which makes it easier to dive into hard conversations without feeling buried under them. That's why comedy tends to teach us better than tragedy. It sort of bypasses our mental roadblocks, letting new ideas slip in without triggering our usual pushback against tough realities. Bukowski was a master at using humor to say things that might have turned people off if he'd come at them with a totally serious tone. His jokes struck a chord with just about everyone, poking fun at intellectuals and everyday people, creatives and workers, lovers and adversaries alike, all those fascinating human beings. What they shared were all those human quirks and contradictions, which Bukowski believed cut across all social and cultural lines. Sure, different folks had different details in their lives, but everyone knew something about kidding themselves, feeling needy, and stumbling through life's challenges. Because of this, his humor was easy for anyone to relate to, avoiding the snooty and exclusive vibes that sometimes come with more high-browed jokes. Perhaps most importantly, Bukowski's humor showed that even amid true hardship, there was room for joy. Laughter didn't fix everything or make pain disappear, but it proved the human spirit could rise above darkness simply by acknowledging and laughing at the absurd parts of life. If you could find something funny about your predicament, it showed you hadn't been utterly defeated by it. In this way, humor became a bit of a rebellious stand against despair, showing that just being aware, just being alive, had value, regardless of what was happening. Seeing the humor in the grand cosmic joke might just be the most genuinely human way to respond to a world that often seems designed to get us down. Part 15. Bukowski always found himself at a fork in the road that we all face, even if we pretend it's not there, trying to balance between being free and feeling secure. Every time he hit a critical point, Bukowski leaned towards freedom, choosing authenticity over comfort. He was a guy who picked being his own person over blending in, and this choice wasn't just about how he lived day to day. It was central to how he understood what truly made life meaningful versus just chasing the typical success story. Take, for instance, when Bukowski's writing started earning him some decent money in his 50s. He could have opted for a stable lifestyle, maybe get a house, rub elbows with publishers, and establish a secure literary career. But nope, he kept his life simple, avoided getting too tied up professionally, and refused to change his writing to satisfy publishers or critics. He understood that playing by the rule books might steal the unique voice that made his writing stand out from the get-go. Most people seem to be doing the opposite, sacrificing their freedom and authenticity for security and social acceptance. They ended up in jobs they hated, formed superficial relationships, and led lives molded by others' values instead of their own. To them, trading freedom for safety made sense, especially when fears about making ends meet or not fitting in cropped up. But Bukowski realized these so-called securities often disappeared in a heartbeat. Jobs ended, marriages fell apart, and social status could collapse, leaving them with neither freedom nor security, only memories of what they gave up. He knew opting for freedom came with different risks than choosing security. Going for independence and staying authentic could result in being broke, lonely, and left out socially. Chasing security and acceptance might make you forget who you really are, leading to a life that felt hollow despite outward success. Both paths had real dangers, but Bukowski figured that gambling on freedom was more honest and manageable over time than the risks that came with seeking security. He'd rather be poor but genuine than rich and phony, because he got that being true to oneself was at the heart of any real happiness in life. This mindset also shaped how he handled relationships. Bukowski chose partners and friends based on real bonds and true emotions, not for what they could offer, socially or emotionally. He didn't flinch from ending relationships that felt comfortable but lacked authenticity, even if it meant facing solitude. He preferred going it alone with its uncertainties over sticking with relationships that forced him to fake it to avoid loneliness or arguments. This wasn't because he undervalued human connections, but because he understood that genuine closeness happened only when people were their true selves, not putting on masks to avoid conflict or the risk of rejection. Bukowski also dodged the safety nets that came with groups or movements if it meant blindly adopting what they stood for. He could have easily fit in with political teams, literary rebels, or blue-collar icons by signing up for their beliefs and causes. But joining up often meant giving up some personal judgment and the gut-level responses to life's unexpected turns. He valued independent thinking too much to trade it for the comfort of a group's ready-made stances, even if they mostly lined up with his own beliefs. To him, the freedom to think without limits was far too precious to exchange for a sense of fitting in. For Bukowski, juggling freedom and security wasn't just about making choices in the outside world, but also about what went down inside a person's head. Balancing the need for safety and fitting in with the desire to be genuine and stand up for yourself isn't a walk in the park. Some people solve this internal tug-of-war by siding entirely with one over the other. You get folks who either toss all societal norms out the window or who give up their personal ambitions to just blend in. But Bukowski didn't want to choose one path over the other like that. He strived to honor both sides without letting one overpower the other, which meant he was continuously searching for that sweet spot between speaking his truth and fulfilling his social obligations. It was an ongoing process for him, one that he refined as he gained more life experiences and self-awareness. He realized that in opting for freedom over always playing it safe, the things that really mattered were different from what most people thought. When you're gone, people won't be caught up in how much money you made, what job title you achieved, or how squeaky clean your image was. But the honest moments, the times when you lived truthfully and expressed that truth, would hold real significance. With the certainty of life's end, the perceived security we cling to loses its mask, while true freedom retains its importance as long as you're alive. This understanding made choosing freedom a bit easier, revealing which values were lasting and which were just societal hand-me-downs. Bukowski also noticed that his choice to chase freedom was partly because He didn't have to juggle responsibilities for others, like a family or dependents. People busy caring for others often didn't get to prioritize personal truth over the security that came with those responsibilities. Not having children or major financial commitments gave Bukowski more freedom in choosing his lifestyle, a privilege not everyone can claim. Still, he saw many people hiding behind their responsibilities, claiming they had no choice but to settle when, in fact, fear or laziness was the culprit. The key was to honestly discern when security was genuinely necessary and when it was just a bailout, to avoid the daring moves that authentic living might demand. Real freedom was about owning your choices instead of blaming the circumstances life handed you. Part 16, we dive into Bukowski's changing views on what it means to be a genius and how creativity really works. Over his lifetime, he wrestled with the concept of genius, starting off with a chip on his shoulder about those who had fame and fortune. But as he went along, he started to see creativity as a marathon rather than a sprint. He didn't learn this from reading up on fancy art theories. It was more about getting his hands dirty with the daily slog of writing and figuring out what lifted or blocked his ability to create real art. This first-hand experience taught him way more than any endless debates over what gets the creative juices flowing. When Bukowski was just starting out, he was really bugged by how his work seemed to go unnoticed, while others, who he thought weren't as good, got all the applause. He couldn't understand why average stuff was getting published and praised, while his intense and real writing got the cold shoulder. This sense of injustice fed his belief that real genius went unrecognized and that true artists were being held back by unfair systems. There was a grain of truth to his thinking, but these ideas also served as a kind of personal shield, helping him hold on to his self-esteem during tough times when rejection was all he got. The genius idea became a story he told himself to keep on going, even when it felt like nobody else cared. As he grew older and his work started gaining more attention, Bukowski's take on being creative became more grounded. He realized that the natural talent he might have was way less important than sticking with the routine of writing, inspired or not. If genius was real, it wasn't about having those rare flashes of brilliance, but about being faithful to the grind and being real. The writers who were remembered weren't the ones waiting for the muse. They were the ones who plowed through doubt, criticism, and failure. This method of discipline was something anyone could pick up, not some kind of magic gift saved for a special few. Bukowski noticed his best stuff popped out when he didn't overanalyze and let his natural voice come through without worrying about getting it just perfect. It was all about finding that sweet spot between being laid back and not getting lazy, avoiding forcing things. He learned to go with his gut while writing, putting truthfulness above trying to be clever or impressive. The most moving pieces spoke to readers because they tapped directly into shared human experiences and emotions. The strongest work came from simply describing what was going on around and within him without sugarcoating it or attaching unnecessary meanings. He also saw that safeguarding creativity from certain mental blocks and negative vibes was crucial. Things like hanging out with others, criticism, and the chase for money could mess with the delicate connection to his inner self needed for true expression. These elements weren't necessarily bad, but they could distract from the barely noticeable creative flow that produced real art. To keep that stream alive, He needed to tune out outside pressures and ride the wave of his own creative rhythm. Bukowski wasn't buying into the idea that artists have to suffer to create. Sure, his rough background gave him loads to write about, but he figured out that you didn't need to chase misery to be creative. What really mattered was staying genuine and digging deep into whatever life threw his way, whether it was a rough patch or a moment of joy. The key was getting good at watching and capturing your experiences without boxing them into preconceived notions. You could fine-tune your observation skills whether life's a roller coaster or a walk in the park. His idea of genius also took into account how personal talent fits into larger cultural and historical trends, which can shape what's seen as doable or worthwhile at any given moment. There are plenty of people teeming with talent whose gifts didn't get noticed because they just appeared at the wrong time or place where nobody really valued their abilities. On the other hand, some folks struck gold with fame and success purely due to luck, the right timing, or how well they could sell themselves, not because they were the cream of the crop. Understanding this helped him maintain a balanced view on what success and failure truly meant. He cottoned on to the idea that applause from others didn't really measure up to your actual worth or accomplishments. What truly mattered was the real value in the work itself, not what critics or audiences thought about it. Bukowski came to understand that creativity wasn't an isolated activity. It was about having a curious and open approach to everything life threw at you, the very qualities that made someone a fantastic writer, like honesty, attentiveness, and a willingness to feel deep emotions, also enriched their daily life, making them more alive and aware. Conversely, behaviors that stifled creativity, like numbing your feelings, not being honest with yourself, or fixating on other people's opinions, stripped away life's richness. He realized that growing as an artist was inseparable from growing as a person. Both required the same commitment to truthfulness and authenticity. Living a creative life meant paying more attention and avoiding self-deception. Perhaps most importantly, Bukowski figured out that the essence of creative brilliance wasn't about churning out masterpieces, but staying true and honest, no matter what the world threw your way. Genuine creative success was about sticking to a path of truthfulness and authenticity, even in the face of fame, fortune, or glowing reviews. Many artists got derailed by success, conforming their work to what the market demanded or what critics favored instead of remaining true to their own evolving vision. The ultimate test of creativity was maintaining your integrity through every twist and turn of life, continually engaging in genuine self-reflection and expression that made the work special in the first place. Part 17. His take on politics is driven by a strong suspicion of centralized power and authority, not by loyalty to any ideology or political party. Over time, he observed that political and social movements, no matter how good they seemed at the start, often got mixed up in the pursuit of power and self-interest. This nudged him toward a kind of anarchistic individualism. While he didn't see group solutions as the answer to social problems, he felt deeply about human pain and unfairness. His political awareness didn't come from studying thick books of political philosophy. Instead, it came from working alongside everyday people trapped in economic and social systems pretending to be on their side. His stint at the post office opened his eyes. There, he saw smart and skilled workers who were treated like just another part of the machine by managers climbing the ranks, not because of their talents, but because they went along with strict rules. He quickly realized that the difference between what institutions claim to do for the public and how they treat their employees reveals a harsh truth. Protecting their interests usually comes first. He also struggled to trust political movements that claimed to support working-class folks or the poor. He noticed these efforts often led by middle-class intellectuals armed with theories, but little real understanding of the hardships they claimed they wanted to change. Their ideas often didn't stick because they weren't based on the everyday challenges people faced. Plus, the leaders seemed more interested in gaining power rather than improving lives. The whole concept of revolutions and reforms often seemed like just another way for ambitious people to climb the ladder by stepping on others' struggles. He saw that even well-intentioned folks in politics ended up on a slippery slope. To make it, they had to fit into the political machine, teaming up with people they didn't completely trust, making promises they couldn't keep, and reducing complex issues to catchy phrases. This endless cycle of compromise and showmanship dulled their clear thinking and honest dialogue on difficult issues. Sooner or later, those reformers began to resemble the career politicians they once opposed. Even though Bukowski turned away from organized politics, he cared about social justice and was aware of the big flaws in the system. His writing sheds light on poverty, job mistreatment, racism, and other serious problems rooted in his experiences. But he believed these were just symptoms of deeper issues in human nature and power dynamics, problems that politics alone couldn't solve. Even if laws changed or wealth got spread around, in his view, it wouldn't address the innate tendencies toward control, greed, and self-deception at the core of injustice. He reckoned real change had to spring from individuals transforming their lives instead of relying on collective efforts. He was also wary of trying to solve social problems with carefully plotted strategies and expert plans. He'd seen too many supposedly foolproof programs fail because they didn't account for tangled human desires or the unintended consequences of meddling with the system. Whether it was social engineers or political leaders, they seemed to overestimate their ability to predict and control human behavior, often ignoring how easily their efforts could backfire or create new problems. As the saying goes, good intentions can pave the way to hell, and Bukowski had seen enough on that path to be cautious of anyone claiming to have a guaranteed fix for society's deep-seated problems. This dude wasn't your average conservative trying to keep everything as it is. Instead, he was a pessimist who doubted that any system could completely get rid of the deep-seated causes of human suffering. He saw how every generation thought they'd cracked the code to solve age-old problems, only to realize their solutions often brought about new, sometimes even bigger, messes. From his perspective, this made him skeptical of sweeping revolutionary promises and overly enthusiastic reformers. But it also made him appreciate the little wins and individual acts of kindness. Sure, you might not overhaul the world, but you can absolutely treat the people around you with respect and honesty. Bukowski figured that when it came to politics, the most rebellious stance was to be true to who you are, pushing back against oppressive systems and societal expectations. By staying true to his own values, being honest about his life, and steering clear of the power struggles others seem to chase, he set an example of defiance that resonated more than any big protest. This type of personal rebellion didn't need leaders, complex manifestos, or large groups that could easily be swayed. It just required the courage to be yourself in a world constantly trying to shape you into something else. This approach to politics was accessible to anyone, regardless of their background or resources, making it more democratic than political movements demanding specific expertise or organizational skills. Bukowski understood that focusing on individual change had its limitations and wasn't enough for dealing with large-scale issues that needed group efforts. Still, he believed that without individuals committed to truth and authenticity, collective actions would fall into the same traps that ruined past reforms. A fair society needed to be built by people ready to live honestly and resist corruption in their own lives. Until enough folks reached this level of integrity, political solutions would only scratch at the surface, leaving the deeper issues unresolved. Part 18. Booze, Consciousness, and the Chemistry of Bukowski's Life. Bukowski's relationship with alcohol wasn't your typical story. It started as a way to numb his pain, turned into a kind of tool, and eventually became something he thought gave him insights into life through altered states of consciousness. Drinking wasn't just about being wild or chasing some artistic vibe. It was a chaotic journey showing how booze could mess with his brain, but also teach him about his creativity, consciousness, and the essence of real life. You can really get where Bukowski's coming from by understanding how deeply intertwined he was with his drinking habit. To him, it was a way to keep things real in a world set up to squash authenticity. When he was a young guy, it helped him escape feeling left out, deal with harsh family situations, and handle money troubles. Alcohol was his go-to for fleeing that suffocating anxiety of not fitting in. A pretty common escape route for people going through tough emotional times without a better way to cope. But before long, Bukowski discovered that alcohol wasn't just about numbing his feelings. It removed barriers that blocked his honesty and creativity. A couple of drinks, and he could shake off the usual crap, like trying to fit in and second-guessing himself, that kept him from expressing his true self. It wasn't that alcohol magically sparked his creativity, it simply gave him access to thoughts and emotions that were there all along. For Bukowski, drinking transformed from being self-sabotage into a voyage of self-discovery, though it was always a fine line to walk. Bukowski was intrigued by how drinking altered his mindset and reshaped his take on reality. Problems that seemed huge when sober sometimes became laughable after a few drinks. Yet, insights that appeared profound during a drunk moment might turn out to be silly when sober. Playing around with his state of mind taught him that reality is far more fluid and subjective than most people realize, and what seems like the absolute truth might just be one viewpoint among many. This understanding of perception's flexibility became a bedrock of his philosophical outlook. He also saw booze as a way to peel back the layers people hid behind. Drinking with others revealed their true selves, stripping away the formalities that hid who they really were. It could get ugly or embarrassing, sure, but this raw honesty also offered deeper insights into human nature, letting him write more truthfully about people's hidden motivations. In his eyes, alcohol was like a truth serum, revealing character in a way that day-to-day life rarely did. Bukowski wasn't blind to the downside of excessive drinking, though. He watched alcohol destroy lives, including that of his first love, Jane Cooney Baker, and he felt its own damage on his health, his relationships, and his productivity. He understood that those moments of creative brilliance or insight often came at a price, impacting his physical and emotional well-being. The trick was to drink with intention, taking advantage of alcohol's mind-altering potential without handing over control, an ongoing struggle with addiction he never completely mastered. As he got older, Bukowski realized the toll his heavy drinking was taking on him, so he gradually shifted his approach, cutting back without quitting entirely. He began drinking more thoughtfully, using it to hit a certain mood or for social occasions, but making sure to have sober periods to stay healthy and clear-headed. This more nuanced approach came from recognizing that different states of mind were useful for different circumstances. It wasn't about staying in one state forever, but about finding value in the mix of experiences. He appreciated the flexibility to navigate between being sober and a little buzzed, avoiding getting stuck in any one mode for too long. Bukowski's musings on booze made him realize why people might want to mess with their regular mindset. He picked up on the fact that just living life normally all the time could feel like wearing a tight jacket, thanks to societal norms, personal insecurities, or routines that keep folks from truly experiencing life. The pull of alcohol, drugs, or other consciousness-altering methods wasn't merely about dodging reality. It often came from a real desire to see life from different angles and expand one's horizon. Yet, many didn't possess the smarts or the self-control to dive into these altered states safely, which often resulted in them leaning too heavily on substances, effectively shrinking their world instead of enlarging it. Ultimately, Bukowski concluded that being mindful and making deliberate choices matters most, no matter your mental state. Whether you're sipping on a drink or completely sober, the key was to tune into what you're genuinely feeling and uncover why. By viewing substances as tools, not just escapes, and staying honest with yourself, you could open doors to experiences and insights you might otherwise miss. But this outlook demanded understanding when the journey was worthwhile or when the stakes were just too high. The goal wasn't to cling to one mental state, but to learn how to navigate through varying states with care and authenticity. Part 19. In his later years, Bukowski started pondering over what, if anything, would remain from his life and work after he was gone. He approached this thought with his usual skepticism about the need to be remembered or achieving some grand sense of literary immortality. For him, legacy often acted as a facade for the fear of death and a desire for significance that fame couldn't truly provide. Instead of striving to be remembered through his writing, he focused on living in the moment with honesty, leaving it up to others to decide what might endure. He recognized that pursuing a lasting legacy often interfered with the quality of the work itself. Writers overly focused on their legacy ended up writing for critics and academics rather than the actual readers, resulting in work that was impressive but lacked genuine life. They often suppressed their true voice to create something seemingly more enduring, missing the fact that only sincere and heartfelt expressions stood a chance of resonating with future generations. The most enduring works usually came from artists eager to convey their real experiences, not from those seeking to build monuments to themselves. He also understood that how someone is remembered once they're gone is beyond their control. Critics, academics, and cultural influencers often interpret an artist's work through the lens of their own times and interests. The Bukowski that future generations might recognize could differ quite a bit from the real man who lived and wrote, much like how our views of past writers often reflect today's context more than historical truth. Therefore, longing for a specific type of recognition was futile, as it was impossible to control how people who never knew you might understand or misinterpret your work. The smart move was crafting authentic work and letting time determine its value. For Bukowski, true significance lay in how his work touched those currently alive, not in its future accolades. He received numerous letters from readers who felt less alone because of his books, who found solace in their struggles, or whose tough times were made easier by his words. This kind of connection with people facing similar challenges was more meaningful and real to him than any amount of critical praise. If his work offered comfort or insight to those in need, that was legacy enough for him, regardless of whether future generations ever knew his name. His views on legacy were also influenced by his thoughts on death and the transient nature of human accomplishments. No matter how famous or influential someone became, they'd eventually vanish from memory as if they never existed. Empires rise and fall, languages extinguish, and even the greatest artworks eventually fade or are forgotten. From this larger perspective, being celebrated or overlooked appeared roughly the same, as both led to being ultimately forgotten. This realization freed him from the burden of worrying about his reputation, allowing him to focus on the intrinsic value of what he was creating rather than its prospects for enduring. Still, Bukowski observed that while individual legacies may fade, the human experiences he wrote about were timeless. As long as people grappled with loneliness, endured jobs they detested, fell in and out of love, and confronted their mortality, his reflections on these experiences would continue to be relevant. Details of his personal life might one day be mere historical curiosities, but the emotions and insights he offered could still resonate with readers facing similar situations. This type of legacy wasn't about personal immortality, but about contributing to the ongoing human narrative of what it means to be alive and conscious in a challenging world. The writer started to see that maybe his real legacy wouldn't be something he could plan or control. He thought about the possibility of other writers coming across his work and feeling inspired to write more openly about their own experiences. This influence could ripple out far beyond the pages of his books. Readers, too, might take away lessons from his writing, learning to be more genuine and compassionate, both with themselves and with others. While these indirect influences were hard to quantify, they might end up being more significant than any awards or recognitions because they affected everyday lives, beyond just thoughts about literature. Above all, he was convinced that the most meaningful legacy anyone could leave was to demonstrate how to live a life of truth and authenticity, regardless of life's challenges. In a world often full of pretense and compromise, simply being genuine and speaking your truth could empower others to do the same. This kind of impact couldn't be orchestrated or enforced. It naturally emerged from a commitment to integrity, over chasing success and valuing authenticity, over seeking approval. If he managed to show that staying true to oneself was possible, despite the risks, that might be the most valuable gift for future generations. In the end, what truly mattered wasn't what you created, but how you lived and inspired others to embrace courage and honesty in their own lives. Part 20. Bukowski had this deep-rooted belief that embracing contradictions was just part of being human and living honestly. Instead of trying to iron out the clashes within his beliefs and emotions, he just rolled with life's paradoxes. He found peace in accepting these contradictions, sparing himself the exhausting task of maintaining a consistent persona. This approach allowed him to tackle whatever life tossed his way without cramming his feelings into rigid categories that defined his worth or meaning. He understood that he could be cruel yet kind, a pessimist yet hopeful, selfish yet generous, wise yet foolish, all in a single day or even during a single conversation. Rather than getting bent out of shape about these contradictions or picking just one side, he saw them as proof of living a fully human life. This mental nimbleness let him adjust to different situations, free from the chains of a fixed image of himself. He could be stubborn one moment and gentle the next, without worrying whether his actions lined up with some grand identity. His acceptance of contradictions even shaped the way he thought about life. He could believe that life was simultaneously meaningless and wonderful, that love was essential yet destructive, that winning didn't really matter, but was still worth pursuing, and that people were both selfish and genuinely giving. These weren't ideas that needed sorting out. They encapsulated the complexity of life that couldn't be pinned down by any single perspective or simple answer. Life was full of contradictions, and any philosophy aiming to erase them was probably too simplistic to tackle real-life trials. Being okay with contradictions also let Bukowski change his mind and tweak his beliefs as new experiences rolled in, without feeling like he was betraying his past self. He could recognize when old thoughts just didn't cut it anymore and move on without needing to defend them. This open-mindedness kept his thoughts dynamic and flexible, not stuck and guarded. He prioritized finding the truth over clinging to past beliefs, daring more to discuss lived experiences rather than adhering to a tidy philosophical script that might gloss over life's messiness. His knack for admitting past mistakes and switching gears was perhaps his sharpest intellectual gift. He also knew that conflicting truths might apply to different phases or aspects of life. What worked for him when he was younger might be off the mark as he got older, and insights that got him through rough patches might not fit once he found some peace. Instead of chasing universal truths for all times, he leaned into the idea that the best course often depended on the moment. This practical flexibility armed him well to handle all of life's twists and turns as time went on. Bukowski's acceptance of contradictions also made him more forgiving of other people's inconsistencies and slip-ups. He recognized that everyone was juggling conflicting desires, needs, and responsibilities that didn't always align. This understanding led him to judge others less harshly and appreciate the challenge of living honestly in a convoluted world. He could see the goodness in people's intentions, even if their actions fell short, and he could overlook faults that came from being human rather than from ill will. This kind vantage toward life's contradictions enriched his relationships and allowed people to be themselves, rather than being critiqued for who they weren't. His way of embracing contradictions helped Bukowski maintain his cool and humor amid life's absurdities. Instead of getting upset over how things are supposed to be versus how they actually turn out, he found humor and even charm in it. The idea that thinking creatures, capable of envisioning perfection, were tangled up in imperfection struck him as more of a comedy, especially once he accepted that contradictions were the norm, rather than something unusual. Laughing at life's paradoxes made tackling existence a bit easier and more enjoyable, despite its obvious flaws and frustrations. Bukowski seemed to understand that welcoming contradiction was crucial, realizing that being genuine didn't mean having to be flawless or having all the answers. It just meant being honest about life's reality. You didn't have to solve every inner turmoil or polish every defect to live truthfully. You just had to stop pretending to be simpler or better than you were. Embracing your entire self, messy and imperfect as it is, was the essence of the authentic life Bukowski cultivated over the years. In the end, the wisdom wasn't in resolving life's contradictions, but in learning to live with them, finding beauty and meaning in a complicated world where simple answers are rare. That might have been his last offering to anyone willing to listen, the permission to be fully human, contradictions included. Charles Bukowski never claimed to have all the answers to life's mysteries. What he offered was perhaps more valuable, showing how he faced life head-on without deluding himself or using comforting lies, and how he managed to laugh despite what he learned about human existence. His philosophy wasn't a set of instructions to follow, but more of an invitation for each person to create their own honest connection with reality, whatever form it might take. In a world where everyone is trying to sell some easy solution, Bukowski simply shared his journey and the raw truths he'd accumulated from his refusal to avoid uncomfortable realities. Maybe that's the most anyone can give another, the bravery to see things as they are and the comfort of knowing others have wrestled with the same harsh truths and still found ways to navigate this strange and incredible human journey.